First, in just 7 days, more than 1 million people have fled the war in Ukraine, with tens of thousands of Africans and other non-Caucasians equally as frightened and at risk as the rest amongst them. However, non-white refugees escaping Russia's invasion continue to share stories of segregation, discrimination and racism on the road out of the conflict zone. Now, Ukraine has set up a hotline for African citizens facing difficulty, as many, not all, but a significant number of refugees of color say that their ordeals have been made worse by mistreatment.
And happy Saturday and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, March 5th, 2022. We are fast approaching getting through a quarter of the year. And there is so much happening. And, you know I say it every Saturday that we come on here that we have plenty to talk about, but we really do have plenty to talk about. And I need somebody to talk to. So I got my two favorite people, Val Atkinson and Dr. Nicole McFarlane from Fayetteville State University, and Val Atkinson, formerly of North Carolina Central University. Hey, folks, welcome back to The Deal.
Thank you, Ed. Good to be here.
Good to be here.
Well, I'll start with you, good Dr. McFarlane. We saw the clip of the Africans trying to exit Ukraine, and of course, they're not being treated like you would expect, right? Because that's how it is anytime colored folks show up anywhere. And they're trying to get out of Ukraine. Have you been following that, and what's your thoughts about what you've seen in the clips leading into the program?
I've been following the story. I would beg to differ just a little. I think they're being treated exactly the way I expect. Given the history and the social culture, the political culture of Ukraine, it's not that surprising that they would have very strong nationalist, white nationalists. Well, Ukrainian nationalists equals white nationalists, right? Perspective and policy when it comes to allowing people to evacuate, allowing sheltered, and supporting and protecting people who live there. It's the idea, I guess, supposedly is Ukrainians first, and Ukraine is often touted as being the country with the highest ratio of blue-eyed blonde-haired people in the world, right? That's their claim to fame, that there's more natural blondes in Ukraine than anywhere else in any other country in the world. And so if you're Ukrainian, you are a certain way, you look a certain way, you talk a certain way, and the Black African, North African, and West African, East African, Central African immigrants that are there are experiencing extreme discrimination, hostility. A lot of the images actually remind me of Hurricane Katrina, when Black people were seeking refuge, seeking higher ground. So kind of unfortunately what is expected, because I think Amanda Seales said it best: racism always got time. Racism got time during apocalypse. Racism got time during war. Racism got time, and I think we need to remember that.
Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah. Val Atkinson, I'll ask you the same question. Are there any surprises about what we're seeing at the border? And then beyond that, is there anything that really can be done about it?
Well, taking the first question first, no surprises on my part, simply because I look at racism, as many folks do, as a global issue. I know we concentrate and focus on the racial issues that we are having right here in the United States of America because of our history, the way this country got started in the first place. But race has become a global phenomenon, and people treat it that way. we meaning the United States of America, specifically talking about the white population here, has been very successful at selling the idea of white supremacy and non-white inferiority. And they've sold it not only in America, but around the world. So when people start taking on Western culture, start following Western civilization, race plays a role in that. It's always right below the surface, if not right out front in your face. So these are the reasons that it didn't surprise me at all. I think one of the reasons that we're having trouble in Ukraine right now is Putin and his boys not liking the idea of some of his former satellites taking up Western culture and acting as if they prefer Western civilization over their own or over his or whatever, which includes and is about the business of race. Like I said, it's always right below the surface. So none of that surprises me.
Yeah, I'll have to echo what you guys said. I want to deal with this a little bit more. One last piece of this is the UN had to respond, and they appointed a special representative to oversee the UN response. And let's take a look at that clip, and then we'll come back and talk about what might come of this.
Chiume, thanks very much for making the time to speak to me. Now, Ukraine set up a hotline. The AU's condemned any racist treatment. African evacuations have picked up pace. All the attention has presumably led to more instructions to border guards and the like to treat non-white refugees better. Do you think that the problem's been resolved?
I think that it's really heartening to see that there has been the kind of response that we've seen. And I want to highlight it because there are other conflict situations where you have non-white refugees and migrants being treated differently from others, and we haven't seen this sort of a response. I think it's important to acknowledge that there are moves that are being made, but I would say that at this point it's insufficient. It's important to have hotlines, it's important to have all of these statements, but until the conditions for people on the ground change, I think we still have to keep the pressure on.
And what have...
So Dr. McFarlane and Val, so they appoint a sister who's based in LA to oversee what the UN is doing in Ukraine. Obviously, getting somebody on the ground is going to be hard, right? But, she even admits that it's a good first step, but it's a long way from being a solution. I think we offered the pessimistic view of this, that racism is permeates so much of everywhere, and so to wrap this part of the discussion up, where do we go from here? What does this tell potential immigrants to Slavic nations about whether or not you should even attempt to immigrate there in the first place? I mean, I know people want to go and experience the rest of the world, and we've all been to different countries or whatever. But I'll ask you, Dr. McFarlane, if you were similarly situated, would you ever consider going to one of those Slavic countries to study or just even to visit?
Well, not right now. I actually was interested in going to the country, but remember, the term balkanization comes from that part of the world, right? And that's just a word to describe tribalism, to describe white people, right? So balkanization emanates from that type of the world, the sort of inter-European, intracontinental hate and dissension that really has characterized that portion of the world for so long. Would I consider studying there? It depends on what type of status I had, what kind of protection was involved. Would it involve a driver, a professional driver that appointed by, and oversaw by the emissaries in the government? What kind of house apartment would I be assigned to, and what kind of security? All of those things would have to be in place, and I would have to be in good and strong touch with the U.S. Embassy consulate on every single day.
Yeah.
That would have to be, all those things would have to be in place, absolutely.
Yeah. So Val, when are you booking your flight to Latvia or Estonia?
It ain't happening.
I think that'll be the final word on that. So I want to remind you, you're watching The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson and Dr. Nicole McFarlane from Fayetteville State University. We started off today talking about the treatment of black immigrants from all over Africa trying to get out of Ukraine and the difficulty they've been having. I want to continue talking about this conflict for a moment because I have been interested in the coverage, and I'll start with you, Val, and because you've taught media politics and that kind of thing. Whenever something happens to white people, particularly in Europe, it becomes extremely dire, and we have to be really, really concerned about it. But there was a similar situation that happened in Syria with people having to flee. We know what happened in Afghanistan and how that was covered. We know what's going on in Saudi Arabia and their war on the Houthis and that kind of thing. And obviously there are conflicts throughout Africa that are going on that never get any coverage.
Tragedies like
Never.
these happen frequently
Now,
in the
obviously,
makeshift camps in northern Idlib.
People
Tens of
are
thousands of
concerned about
people are
Europe
living
here in
here
America
in
because
miserable conditions.
We've been told
They
that
lack
they're the closest people to us. But talk to me about your assessment of the coverage so far and how it seems to be extremely slanted to, in my view, reminding us that they're white folks like us. That's the way it comes across to me.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it goes back to the fact that Ukrainians have adopted and fled to and embraced Western culture to the extent that they have. This reminds a lot of news coverage people like producers and editors. This reminds them of looking in the mirror or looking across the street or next door. These, in their eyesight, are people practicing Americanism, practicing Western culture and that kind of thing. So this is the way they contact their viewers. They know they can get some positive responses, showing little white boys and little white girls crying and the like, and showing older folks having trouble walking down the street and needing help, and all of the tear-jerking things that they're trying to do, as you said, Ed, did not happen when people were fleeing from Syria and from the Congo and from many other places that there were problems. And we know what this is. This is all about race. This is all about culture. This is all about Western civilization. And I welcome it because I think it's a step closer to the entire planet realizing what all of these things are about and what the central issue is here. And once we do that, I think we're closer to resolving the problem. But we first got to realize what it is. Race plays too big of a role to be put back on the back burner. We got to bring it out front and we got to talk about it and we got to resolve it. And I think this issue here with the Ukrainians is one step closer to making that realization.
Yeah. So, Nicole, again, I know you do a lot with media and imagery and that kind of thing. What do you think about the imagery so far in the news reports, besides the black folks having trouble, how they've tried to frame this on the news coverage that you've seen?
The cliches. The cliches look. They parallel a lot of the cliches that are the imagistic cliches that we can recognize from the earlier pictures, like from some of the earliest photographs of war from World War I and World War II. Right? They, of just that kind of suffering, and but it also looks like it reminds me of the Afghanistan. What happened in Afghanistan. I think what happens though is that the media coverage really does expose themselves. They expose their racial biases. they describe, they say things like, we shouldn't be seeing blonde hair, blue eyed, and I can't get past that. Just the phenotypic description of the people fleeing war, as though the only people who are supposed to be fleeing war and suffering horrendous state violence are Black people or brown people. I think that is so profound, and to see it, I think it's a wake-up call. I think it should be a wake-up call to diasporic people everywhere, that we don't have to get sucked into their conflicts, and when it's the African Union has just expressed, African Economic Union, they've expressed concern about their people. I think that it should end there. I think at that point, I think that I don't think African countries or Caribbean countries should send any of their troops there if the war should escalate or should turn into a proxy. I think that people of Black countries should roundly and succinctly just reject any involvement.
Yeah, stay out of their mess. You know what? This is a good time for a break. But before we go, I do want to make sure that you guys tell folks about the program. Well, obviously, what we try to do is put the world in better context, in our context, the way we view the world. A lot of times you don't see the stories in the way we would tell them, particularly the subject that we're talking about right now, because Dr. McFarlane, you just mentioned it, that I've seen specific stories on CNN and other places where they said this should not be happening to people like us. And I was completely floored, and I guess I should not have been, but I would have thought that they would be a little more transparent than that, instead of just saying it right out that white people should never have to suffer, and it's okay for all these darkies and brown people to suffer. So anyway, I hear the music in the background, so that means that we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue talking about Ukraine and Putin and gas prices and a whole bunch of other stuff. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
The special military operation in Ukraine to protect our citizens in Donbass and to ensure security of our homeland. Russian soldiers and officers are acting like real heroes. Our military are fighting in a stoic way, fully understanding their duty. Even after injuries, soldiers and officers continue to fight. They sacrifice their lives in order to save their comrades and peaceful citizens. In the course of fighting, our military and the formations of Donbass and Lugansk showing heroism.
And welcome back to our second segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Nicole McFarlane. And also Val Atkinson. We've been talking about Ukraine a lot. You saw Vladimir Putin, I don't know what you call him, Val. He president, dictator, leader, strong man, head oligarch of Russia in the break coming back in. Val, according to Vladimir Putin, what they're doing is they're protecting Russian interests in two regions that Russia has considered to be their own independent republics. And he mentioned that the Russian soldiers were being valiant and so on and so forth, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So let's talk a little more deeply about why the Russians say they're in Ukraine. Can you give us your assessment of how you read Putin's explanation of why the Russians decided to invade Ukraine?
Putin's biggest fear, ever since Gorbachev gave the Soviet Union to the West, his biggest fear is that some of those satellite states are going to go over and want to become westernized. He doesn't like that. That was a problem with Georgia. It's the same problem that China has with Taiwan and that people had with Hong Kong. The problem is once these people get a taste of westernization, if I can use that term, they get enamored with it. They want to stay with it. And that is a real blow to any other type of political system in place, because other people see that and they want to go over and become wealthy. They want to go over and hold power and hold office and do all those other kind of things. This is the thing that's really driving Putin. Ukraine is right on his doorstep. They want to be admitted to NATO, meaning you got US troops on Russian borders now, if that happens, if Ukraine becomes admitted to NATO. It scared the bejesus out of Putin. It made him go as far as he has in threatening World War III, got everybody thinking about nuclear weapons and what the causation will be and the fallout, to use a pun, will be if we go that route. So that's what's pushing him, is the whole westernization of these countries on this border.
Well, you said the magic word. I have a clip from a movie, one of my all-time favorite movies, Dr. Strangelove. This is from the trailer from Dr. Strangelove, and then we can talk about it when we come back.
Attack Russia. Oh. Base.
10 females to each male.
The Coca-Cola machine.
Fluids. The Doomsday Machine.
So, Dr. McFarlane, Dr. Strangelove, late 60s Stanley Kubrick film, it's about a mistake that was made in launching a nuclear strike against Russia, and then America's frantic attempts to pull it back. And I'm not going to spoil the movie for people who haven't seen it, but it does not end well. Can you talk to me, Doctor, about this whole... Putin said that, it would be the likes of what nobody has ever seen. Well, the likes of nobody's ever seen. We've seen Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so worse than that would be what? And what is your assessment? Is it a threat? Is it a real potential? And obviously there could be a mistake, right?
It's a threat. It's a real threat. I do think that Russia, under Putin's leadership, has been fighting asymmetrical warfare for so long in terms of the information front that I think he really didn't realize that, and after the instability of the Trump administration, I don't think he really realized that the NATO troops were still ready for him. And that, United States, even though they may not have uniform boots on the ground, wherever there is a military conflict, you better believe the United States is somehow involved in supplying weaponry and equipment, and the idea of just that, like straight up, whatever has to happen on the ground happening. I don't think the Russian military is at all prepared for it. And in terms of nuclear, an actual nuclear crisis, it's a strong. It's that's the thing about it. It's unpredictable. That's what the movie was like. Like anything can happen, and we're really, and it's something so we are so unprepared for. It's such an unthinkable concept. It borders on the absurd to imagine it happening. But I understand that some of the Russian oligarchs are starting to say, like, hold up, Putin, like they're starting to get to the point where, I think he is, especially because of COVID, there are reports that he's been so isolated and so paranoid about catching the virus that he hasn't had close contact with people he's normally been in contact with in terms of the oligarchs, and they have not been able to really communicate with him closely. So you never know what could happen. This could signal the end of Putin's regime. And when a person is like Putin, who is from what I understand has dreamed about this since he was a child, has just always been at the forefront of his mind of Soviet domination of the entire Western world and the entire globe. That he could do anything, and he's not he's not a predictable for all his methodical behavior. I think right now that he could do anything because he is up against the wall, and I don't think.
Yeah. So Val, put this in some historical context for us. I saw, and I was trying to get clearance for it, and I didn't have time, but there was a documentary about Vladimir Putin back in maybe 4 or 5 years ago by Oliver Stone. He went to visit Putin, and he asked Putin, do you believe that Russia would survive a nuclear, world event better than the U.S.? And he said in there that nobody would survive. That if it came to that, it would be because the Americans caused it. And so Oliver Stone asked him, does this harken back to anything about the Cuban Missile Crisis? And Putin says, well, I don't like Khrushchev. I thought he, capitulated to the Americans. That having the Americans be upset because Russia had missiles on their doorstep is akin to me being upset because America has missiles in Estonia. So a little bit back to the talk that we had before, that Putin's upset that Americans are too close. Can you talk to me about that historical context, though? When Russia had missiles in Cuba, we went completely apeshit, and it could have ended very badly until Khrushchev capitulated and took them out. Is this analogous to that Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse? What do we know from the Cuban Missile Crisis? Because Dr. Strangelove, and I saw some behind the scenes from the production of the movie, it was directly related to, they wrote the movie because of what happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
First of all, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we discovered that Russia, or USSR at that time, had missiles 90 miles away from American soil. And JFK wasn't going to take that. He felt he had to posture because he didn't want the Republicans to get a leg up and call him weak. So there was some negotiations going on behind the scenes that Americans were not privy to. And the deal that was made, one of the things that Khrushchev brought up was that, how can you ask me to move missiles out of Cuba? You got missiles in Europe that are closer to 90 miles. You got them right on my border, nuclear weapons. Let's talk about that. So we did a little compromise and we said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll move all of my nuclear weapons out of, short-range nuclear weapons out of Europe that threaten you, and you move your missiles out of Cuba that threaten me. And Khrushchev agreed to that and turned his ships around in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and went back. But the way America was fed this by the media, it says that Khrushchev blinked and he saw the resolve of JFK, and JFK stood strong, and Khrushchev turned his ships around in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and took those missiles out of Cuba, took them back to Russia, and we stopped World War III. And of course, we believed that because it was coming from our media, and it looked like we had prevailed. That gave a lot of people the idea and the notion that that's what you got to do to the Russians, to the Soviets. Stand strong and they'll back down. That's why you got a lot of people now telling us we should have a no-fly zone over Ukraine and all of that kind of stuff. We're just going to get a lot of people killed, maybe even get the entire human race killed.
Well, speaking of that, here's a clip from the Republicans. This is in the response. Governor of Iowa, Governor McReynolds, talking about that.
An attack on democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. Now all Americans must stand united in solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine as they courageously defend their country against Putin's tyranny as they fight for their freedom. But we shouldn't ignore what happened in the run-up to Putin's invasion, waiving sanctions on Russian pipelines while eliminating oil production here at home, focusing on political correctness rather than military readiness, reacting to world events instead of driving them. Weakness on the world stage has a cost, and the president's approach to foreign policy has consistently been too little, too late.
So I don't think we have much else to say. We knew the Republicans were going to come back with that bullshit about this being Biden's fault because he was weak. We've heard Lindsey Graham talk about assassinating Putin. We've heard all the talk about the no-fly zones and all that kind of stuff. I'll leave it there because now I want to talk about American politics. We see what the Republicans are going to do with this, right? Lindsey Graham has already been outspoken. All the talking heads on Fox News have been pretending like Donald Trump wasn't holding Vladimir Putin's hand and playing kissy face with him the whole time. They've forgotten completely about why Trump was impeached the first time, which was over Ukraine. And I'll remind folks who are listening, my piece this week is about that very thing, about why we believe that Ukraine had something to do with the election. They did not. It was Russia, but that's besides the point. Let's talk about some American politics then. Dr. McFarlane, that clip from Governor McReynolds was a response to the overall State of the Union. We pulled that one clip out. Let's talk about the State of the Union. One, did you watch it? And two, what kind of grade do you give Joe Biden for
6 days ago,
State of the Union address?
Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world.
I did watch it,
thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated.
Same grade, I think.
He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would...
Well, I see you're really passionate about it.
He's passing, but I'm not impressed. I see that he's definitely, I watched it, but did not watch it live. I didn't feel compelled to watch it live. It's a type of theater that comes from this. I think one of the things that COVID taught us, if anything, was that the State of the Union is not an essential part of running the country. It's not an essential part of government. It's just an opportunity for the sitting president, his administration, to forward his policies and to push forward his agenda and to energize the base for midterm elections and for the final, for maybe another run. I don't think that. I mean, you know, it was so bipartisan. Like it was, you know, he didn't get a lot of the jeers. Obviously, Boebert and that other one, Marjorie Taylor Greene, like they're gonna do what they do. So like that wasn't even surprising, especially after the South Carolina congressman, from what I remember, jeered Obama back. I think it was in 2009, 10 or something like that. So of course we expected that, and they're just doing what they have to do in order to get talked about, and they're getting donations and stuff and followers on their respective right-wing platforms. But I don't even know what they were jeering, because pretty much everything Biden is doing is triangulated to the right, towards the right, and is really, you know, not terribly, you know, if the Republican Party still has any policy left, nothing he's doing is like so far against GOP politics that, because they're not principled. They're just there to obstruct.
They're just hating right now. Yeah.
Complaining that he didn't tell the little boy happy birthday the day after his birthday. He just mentioned his birthday, but he didn't say happy birthday. So,
well,
you know, like they're looking for anything. They're grasping at straws.
They wanted to impeach Obama over a tan suit. So, Val, let's watch a clip to get to Nicole's point about this tack to the right. It's about policing from the State of the Union.
Like some of you that have been around for a while, I've worked with you on these issues for a long time. I know what works. Investigating crime prevention and community policing, cops who walk the beat, who know the neighborhood, and who can restore trust and safety. Let's not abandon our streets or choose between safety and equal justice. We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them.
Okay, Val, that was Joe Biden saying he doesn't believe in defunding the police. In the State of the Union address, obviously he felt he needed to put that in there. He talked about the police officers in New York being killed. Again, your grade on the speech, but specifically talk to me about why he included that in there as a big part of domestic policy. Why did he feel that he needed to do it?
I want to give him a B on his speech. And the reason I give him a B is my basic feeling about State of the Union addresses in the beginning. I don't think that commanders in chief should be talking about things he had nothing to do with as it pertains to bills passed by Congress or bills not passed by Congress and those kinds of things. I think he should only talk about what he could do, writing executive orders, declaring martial law, or skipping an alternative that he had. Those things under his control. It's what he needs to be talking to the people about. This is what I did for you. This is what I did not do to you after I have committed that I would, so that it would be real. His expectations and his accomplishments really mean something. They don't mean anything if he sets a goal for himself that is out of his control to attain. Why should I come back and listen to you as to whether the goal was attained or not? You had nothing to do with it. You couldn't control any of it. So I don't like States of the Union because of that kind of thing. It's a selling process. It's what you're doing. You're trying to sell your base and other people who haven't made up their mind why they should support you.
Yeah.
That's what you've done. And sometimes some of them take a dig at some of the opposition and that sort of thing. But State of the Union is not one of my biggest events throughout the year.
Yeah, it's a tradition I wish would die. To tell you the truth, I give him a B minus of, I think it's hard to talk about stuff, again, like you said, that you yourself didn't have a whole lot to do about. One last clip before we take a break. This is Biden the day after the State of the Union, talking about the economy, because I want to talk about the economy before the program's over today. Here's Joe Biden talking about job creation.
178,000 new jobs. Over the course of my presidency, our economy has now created 7.4 million jobs. More jobs created in a 13-month period than any time ever before in our history. And we've learned that in February, the unemployment rate fell to 3.8%, down from 6.4% the day I took office, beginning in 2021, which is the fastest decline in unemployment rate in recorded history, because of all of you. And by the way, before the American Rescue Plan passed, the Congressional Budget Office didn't project our unemployment rate to hit 3.8% at any time over the entire decade. Americans are back to work. Yes, family budgets are still tight, but a lot of Americans are getting paychecks this year more than they got last year. And
because we're up on the break, I'll just take this real quick. Biden says that unemployment is back low again, 3.8%, that people are back to work. Naturally, that's because COVID is starting to wane, and a lot of the mask mandates are off. People are going back to offices and those kind of things. There is one thing looming over the economy, though, and that's inflation, and it's been driven by oil prices. We're going to take a break. On the way out, you're going to hear from an economist talking about why gas or why a barrel of oil could hit $200. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
Joining me now is Chris Wheaton. He's an oil and gas analyst at Stifel. Chris, welcome. It's good to have you. $200 a barrel. How do we get to that figure?
Well, Kelly, it's pretty simple. If you want to cut all of Russia out of the global oil market, and remember, Russia is the world's second largest oil exporter, just behind Saudi Arabia, at about 7.5 million barrels a day, you need to pull all the levers of supply to put on as much oil into the market as possible. But you also need to kill demand, because that supply isn't going to be enough to push all of that 7.5 million barrels a day out of the market. And if you look at where demand destruction kicks in, if you look back in 2008, when oil prices were last, at a peak of $140, $150 a barrel, adjust that for inflation, that's how you get to $200 a barrel today. And that's not a price that really we think the global economy can afford.
And welcome back to our final segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That is Dr. Nicole McFarlane and Val Atkinson. We've been talking about a lot this morning. We obviously the program was heavy towards Ukraine because of what's going on. A potential World War III. I mean, it's a serious, Europeans like to drag everybody else into their shit, right? And we've done it twice and killed millions of people, maybe even 100 million people. I don't know, because a lot of people got killed in World War II that we probably don't know about. And then we started dropping the atomic bombs and all kind of other crap out of World War II. So we're on the precipice of something that could turn into that, because Putin said that it would be more spectacular than anything that's ever been seen before. And to me, that means a lot of dead people. So I'll leave it at that. On the way out, you saw an economist talking about oil could get to $200 a barrel. What that means is you could see places that are used to seeing $2 gas have $5 gas. I just looked out the window of the studio here, and there's a gas station right across the street. The gas has gone up 75 cents in the last 24 hours. And if there's increased pressure to put more isolation on Russia, because people are dumb, Val, they don't realize that gas is a commodity that's traded on the world market. If you take that oil off the market, that drives up the price, and Russia actually gets richer. But we won't go there. That's a whole nother thing. I do want to come back to the United States, though. I'm going to start with you, Dr. McFarlane. over the last couple of weeks, we talked about Joe Biden and his pick for the Supreme Court. I think his pick is much more qualified than anybody Donald Trump ever picked. I got a clip, though, I want you to see of this idiot Tucker Carlson, who's on Fox News. This is from the Young Turks. And let's take a look at it, and then I got some questions for you.
Carlson went off on a curious rant regarding President Joe Biden's nominee for the Supreme Court. Now, she's actually been getting a lot of positive commentary from, of course, Democrats, but even some Republicans. And based on what I've seen from her record, she seems great, which means that, of course, Tucker Carlson hates her and has to go on a rant that, I wonder why he's asking to see the certain documents he's calling for here. Let's watch.
So is Ketanji Brown Jackson, a name that even Joe Biden has trouble pronouncing, one of the top legal minds in the entire country? We certainly hope so. Biden's right. Appointing her is one of his gravest constitutional duties. So it might be time for Joe Biden to let us know what Ketanji Brown Jackson's LSAT score was. What did she do in the LSATs? Why wouldn't he tell us that? That would settle the question conclusively as to whether she's a once-in-a-generation legal talent, the next learned hand. It would seem like Americans in a democracy have a right to know that and much more before giving her a lifetime appointment, but we didn't hear that.
So, Doctor, this idiot Tucker Carlson says he wants to see Judge Brown Jackson's LSAT scores, which mean nothing at all. What the hell is he really trying to say? Because you know that he's trying to say something. I know what it is. Tell us what it is.
He's invoking Charles Miller's bell curve, obviously. He is invoking the new white supremacist talking points. I think they're calling it now paleoconservatism, right? The idea that Black people just aren't as smart as white people, that there's a spectrum of intelligence based on racial and ethnic heritage. All of it's totally ridiculous and discredited. Judge Jackson is more than qualified. She's basically stepping into the family business. I mean, her father was, that alone makes her, I'm sure she's probably been talking politics and law since she was a child at the dinner table, and Sunday dinners with her parents. I mean, she's been, she went to Harvard, I believe. She, did a clerkship for the Supreme Court, stepped right into it. She is more than qualified and far more qualified than anybody that, in fact, she's probably twice as qualified as anybody that Trump or let's not even talk about George Bush the father, who he nominated as the last Black nominee. Clarence Thomas, right? She won't be afraid to speak in public because she won't be afraid to write her opinions because she's been quite prolific in that area. She's extremely qualified. She's going to be fine. The conversation that that Tucker Carlson et al. Is driving at is one steeped in just good old-fashioned pseudo-scientific classical racism, white supremacy and racism, and it's not surprising. It keeps coming up, but we should just overlook it and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, Val. So Tucker Carlson, and he emphasized this LSAT score. I don't remember him saying anything about Amy Coney Barrett or Gorsuch or Kavanaugh as far as, those basic qualifications just to get into law school. He failed to mention that she was head of the Harvard Law Review, which is not a small task to become the editor of the Law Review. Talk to me not about Tucker, because he's just a throwaway here in a way for us to enter a discussion, but talk to me about the right wing and how they always go to the lowest common denominator. When they tried to talk about blacks and qualifications, they talked about Obama and where he was actually born. They talked about, anytime you put Negroes in positions, they had a problem with the Secretary of Defense. I thought that was all coded racism about his qualifications. Talk to me about how this always happens.
Well, I'm going to disagree with the first part you said about Tucker. There was a passage that talked about people living in glass houses. Tucker Carlson is the last one who should bring up academic accomplishments. Somebody should ask Tucker, produce the degree, the highest degree you have ever received from an educational institution. Because you know what that is? That's a high school diploma. He never graduated college. And this high school graduate, I know it wasn't a GED, but this high school graduate is questioning a Harvard graduate and the law school admission test that she attained to enter one of the nation's top and premier law schools. He, of all people, wants to know what that was. I don't even know if he could decipher what it means, but he shouldn't get into that realm. That's not his bailiwick. That's not in his wheelhouse to talk about education and educational attainment. I wanted to say that first about this guy. But at any rate, what a lot of conservatives do, you got to understand that they want to appeal to their base. And their base really doesn't like anybody of color. Their base really thinks that they are being taken advantage of and snookered at every end. So anything that they can get to throw up to say that these people are not qualified, they are being given things, and they got quota system going, and they are always got their hand out for handouts and those kinds of things. That's a mainstay of their delivery message system. And anytime they can bring something like that up, they will. Which, and unfortunately, Ed and Nicole, they got people out there that are buying that. They're still buying that and going to the poll and making political decisions based on these crazy things that Tucker Carlson is saying and suggesting. And I don't see any time soon that it's going to stop.
Yeah, I don't either. And like I said, I mean, the last person, like you said, that questioned somebody's qualifications, but that's kind of part and parcel of the right. That they always question qualifications of brown people, black people, but never have anything to say about their own. Dr. McFarlane, the other thing that's happening on the domestic side, in Kentucky, there was a trial of an officer who was part of the team that burst into Breonna Taylor's house and killed her. I want to look at a clip and then we can talk about it, because one of those officers was found not guilty. But I want to talk to you about what really he was being charged with and what really is going on here. And take a look at it.
The jury has found former Kentucky police officer Brett Hankinson not guilty of all counts in that raid, you may remember, that killed Breonna Taylor. For more now, Alex Perez on the phone with us. He has been following this story from the very beginning. Alex, I guess tell us what we know right now, and then let's give a little background and context to how this story went down during that raid.
Sure, Kara. So the jury in this case here deliberating for just about 3 hours before they returned this not guilty verdict on all charges, acquitting Detective Brett Hankinson of the charges against him. Now, the thing we have to point out here, Kara, is that these charges were not related to Breonna Taylor's death. At this point, still no one has been charged in connection with her death. These charges, they were wanton endangerment charges, and they were about the bullets, when Hankinson fired his weapon the evening of that botched raid, those bullets entered neighboring apartments. And one of those
Dr.
neighbor
McFarlane, what I want to talk to you about is we just saw the clip there, and in most of the media coverage that I've seen, they've talked about Breonna Taylor in those introductions to their stories, when in fact this case had nothing at all to do with Breonna Taylor. It had to do with Officer Atkinson and his reckless behavior, which he actually got off for. Talk to me real quick about why Breonna Taylor's name was always mentioned in relation to this, as if, I don't know, she was on trial some kind of way or whatever. Talk to me about the language around this, because even the reporter says, I need to remind you that nobody's ever been charged for anything related to Breonna Taylor.
So Breonna's dead body is on trial, and not Hankinson's reckless behavior. He wasn't even charged with killing her. He was in charge with reckless endangerment of her neighbors. I think they act the way the law, the way the police involved in this situation have been treated as though the property was more valuable than the Black lives that resided, or the lives that live inside the property. It was more about reckless endangerment of like shooting into an apartment. So the doors and the walls and the windows were more valuable and are being protected over the human life. And the way that they have treated Breonna Taylor's legacy, the way the defense attorneys treated, they will continue the same tactic of criminalizing and demonizing Black people for simply being alive and daring to exist.
Yeah.
And it's just been this is what's been done over and over again in our justice system, which is not fair, and our system of policing is not designed to protect people of color. In fact, it is designed to harm and marginalize people of color.
Yeah, Val, one of the things I saw was another crying cop on the stand. Hankinson got on the stand and cried, and he said, he wasn't there to kill Breonna Taylor. He was there to get information about her boyfriend, which wasn't even true, because that was her former boyfriend that they had the warrant for. But again, you saw another crying white defendant on the stand, and it's worked in some cases. In the case of Kyle Rittenhouse, it worked. In the case of Kim Potter, I would say that worked to some degree, because the judge was falling all over herself not to give Officer Potter a tough sentence, because she felt bad for that she killed somebody. And again, not worrying about the dead person. Wrap this up for me, Val. Put this into context for me. Again, we never saw anything from this police reform that supposedly Tim Scott was working on. When was the last time you heard about anything related to that? Was that a red herring? What was that whole bullshit with Tim Scott?
Tim Scott, Karen Bass, and of course Cory Booker were supposed to get together, 3 Black lawmakers, and come up with something about qualified immunity, which we never heard discussed anymore. I think Cory Booker and Karen Bass finally listened to Tim Scott when he said, no, that's a non-starter. I ain't talking about qualified immunity, because they didn't understand that although Tim Scott's lips were moving, it was really Mitch McConnell who was talking through his vocal cords there. And finally, when they understood who was really doing the talking, they gave up and they took the committee and they disbanded the committee, and nothing happened. But nobody talks about that now. Even in the conversations about defund the police, even in the conversations about police brutality, Colin Kaepernick, and nobody talks about qualified immunity and Senators Cory Booker, Tim Scott, and Representative Karen Bass. Why? Why have they been allowed to sweep that under the rug? For some reason, they've been able to do that, and we have no conversation about that. During the State of the Union, Joe Biden threw out a lot of words that indicated to moderates and right-wingers that he was not on the side of defunding the police and that sort of thing. They're running from that now. So I think the wrap in all of this is, and I want to echo something that Nicole said a few minutes ago, is that it's a pandemic of emotions. It's all about race. And I'll be glad when something is done about it.
Well, and also Jim Clyburn is running the table, and Jim Clyburn, from what I see, his most he seems to have the most amount of influence and sway with Joe Biden, and I lived in South Carolina for a number of years. Tim Scott is, obviously the senator, the Republican senator, Jim Clyburn being the congressman, and he was one of the first Black Congressional Black Caucus members to come out against any talk of defunding the police. Remember, and only thing, really, one of the main things that Clyburn is known for is getting out the vote in those the South Carolina primaries with his hog maw and fish fried dinners that he likes to have, and tells people what, I don't know if they have in hog maws, but whatever they're eating, but those things. And he has incredible amounts of sway. And if he, I think that while Cory Booker might want to, have some aspirations, I don't think that he will go against. I don't think anyone's siding with the squad over Clyburn if they have aspirations to higher office or executive office, executive branch. And I don't know. It's just a very it's an unfortunate situation, but the whole idea of we need to defund the more police. The police already have been funded more since COVID and since the George Floyd protests, and they haven't funded them differently. Even more, they haven't. Even if we're going to fund them more, we haven't funded them differently. They're still not better trained. They're still not asking. We're not funding school nurses. We're not funding school cafeteria staffs. We're not doing the things that really do decrease crime, right? We're not doing what we need to do. And to continue to fund the police is just going to continue to it's just the same thing.
End up with dead people like Amir Locke that we've talked about over the last couple of programs, Val. In Minneapolis, nothing much seemed to change in Minneapolis. That you mentioned George Floyd. Before we run out of time, in the coming weeks, we'll have the folks from the George Floyd Memorial Center here. The George Floyd Memorial Center is based in Raleigh, North Carolina, because George Floyd was from North Carolina. He was born in North Carolina. His family's here. I know you see some other family members a lot more on TV, but there's also some events around May 25th, the day that George Floyd was murdered, that'll be taking place here in Raleigh, and we'll have some more details on that, a golf tournament that weekend and some other things. So, but we'll have them on in the coming weeks to talk about those programs and what's coming along. In the meantime, before we run out of time, I have to do what I normally do, which is to ask you, what are you working on, Dr. McFarlane? Or tell me something that I need to think about coming up in the next week.
We need to think about what's coming up is like whether or not this America will do anything to help the African refugees, and even if the African countries themselves are going to step up to help the African refugees.
Okay, and Mr. Val Atkinson, what do we got to look forward to coming up, or something you want to tell us?
I just want to make folks aware that Connections comes on tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Foxy 107, 104. You can pull it up on Radio 1 on your favorite device and listen to it at 8 a.m. Myself, Ed Clark, and Irv Joyner, who's a law professor at North Carolina Central University, and will bring you another edition of Connections. So tune in.
There you go. Well, what I got to tell you is I want you to go to thedealwithedclark.com, read my latest piece about Ukraine and about how white supremacist groups in America are actually funded and supported by Vladimir Putin. Something that is maybe not widely known, but it is known, and there is adequate documentation. A lot of what the Justice Department reports were about that caused people to look at Donald Trump had to do with the fact that known white supremacists, Richard Spencer, David Duke, go down the list, had been visiting Russia and was getting support from Russians to do counter programming when it came to elections. So please go to thedealwithedclark.com. Have people, your friends go there. Go there. You can watch the program there. You can also watch us on Facebook on the Deal with Ed Clark Facebook page, or you can watch it also on YouTube as well. Look, folks, go out, do something